How did we get to this moment? I think is a key question from the historical point of view. In the 80s, between 79 and 80, or 78 and 80, there was a change of era, there was a change of period. And a lot of the movements of the 70s and the 60s, and probably the 50s, which I don't know enough about, there was a break. There was a break. A lot of those movements ended there, closed shop, transformed into something else. And it was very interesting because that's also when the right-wing Newt Gingrich revolution took place, and Ronald Reagan becomes president and starts the Central American Wars. The movement transformed, went from being the centralized committee or the one leader, a big movement or coalition or whatever, went into sort of submerged themselves. We submerged ourselves in the community and started to organize around specific issues that were being faced by the community. Why? Because there was political repression. There had already been repression in the 70s with COINTELPRO. They had killed a number of people from the Black Panther Party. They had jailed Leonard Peltier from the American Indian Movement. They had put several Chicano leaders in jail. They had killed Ruben Solis in August 29th in LA. So a number of things had already played out. But there was also the growing foundation money that was coming in from corporations, and also the growth of the nonprofit sector. And so people went sort of underground in a sense, and instead of organizing what they had organized before, began to organize in a new methodology. Mostly network building around issues, or a number of issues. That became known as intersectionality. So the movement was seeking to create power by creating intersectionality of issues. But that intersectionality was somewhat mechanical in nature and short-lived initiative. It was not the long-term liberation vision that the 60s and 70s movement have had. So they became more short-sighted, more immediate, more pragmatic, and more issue-driven, which made it then parallel, because all the issues then travel in a parallel line rather than really meeting at one point. So if we travel like that, then you can win an issue and lose the war. You know, the environmentalists celebrated in the United States that they had boycotted the tuna that was being caught with nets that would also catch the dolphins and other animals, and they wanted to impose that they use safe nets, which made all the sense. But who could supply those nets were the big companies. In Mexico, they were bringing a lot of tuna to the U.S., and the U.S. boycotted the tuna, driving out 3,000 fishing co-ops that were unions and cooperatives and communities, and wiped them out and left, you know, the tuna fishing to two companies that were now globalized companies coming into Mexico. And yes, they had the nets, but we lost in that equation, no? So those were the contradictions in terms of the network building, is that even as a network, then as a network / organization, it began to compete with the very members that made it up. So the members were not getting the funding because the networks were getting the funding, and so the work was very anemic at the grassroots level because we were not getting the kind of support. And so that was a contradiction. While it expanded the movement in terms of multiple issue approach, it also cut off the oxygen from the local groups. We could develop a big network, but you can only hold it for a certain amount of time before the funding went out or before splits came in, because it was still based on this parallelism, or sectarianism, that did not allow that integration.